However, before we dive into it, there's just a few things that we always have to do before we start answering any academic question. And those things are, firstly, you've got to think. This might sound like an obvious thing, and I've said it in previous videos, but it's so important that you think. You probably would have chosen your question out of the three that you had available to you because you chose the one that you had something to say about. You chose the one that immediately popped out at you as something interesting because maybe you have a strong opinion on it. Well, if that's the case, then especially you need to stop and think before you start writing. Just because you feel strongly about an argument doesn't mean that the argument is correct. So just have a short time or a long time to consider the pros and cons of your argument. If you can't think of any cons, then make sure you think of cons before you start writing, because there certainly will be. Whether you can overcome those cons is another question, but certainly just consider it. And also the nice thing about thinking is that if you, especially when you do research, you'll come across loads of fun and interesting ways of responding to the question that you hadn't even thought of yet. You could perhaps in the videos that I've been doing for this competition or that anybody else has been doing for this competition, they may have provoked you to come up with new thoughts in response to essay questions, and that's a fantastic thing. So just look at the question in as many different ways as possible. Think about it. Secondly, there's define. Well, in all of the questions, there are key terms which can be a bit ambiguous. So just thinking in the questions for this year, the terms religion, God, spirituality, all of them can be a bit ambiguous. What do I mean by that? Well, depending on who you are, you'll define those words in very different ways. The nature of God, i.e., the supreme being of the universe, uh, would be very different in the mind of a Hindu than in the mind of a Roman Catholic. And that's because, well, the Hindu religions are very large and disparate religion. So depending on what kind of Hindu you are, you might not believe that the supreme maker of the universe exists in any sense that a Catholic would understand it to exist. So this just goes to show even words as simple as God, they could do with defining. And this will help you come up with a coherent and easily understood essay, but also an intelligent essay, an essay that shows that you've considered other points of view and that you're very focused and you want to create a watertight argument where you can't undermine it simply by saying, well, somebody else might define God in a different way. It'd be annoying if you wrote a lovely 2,000-word essay and somebody could undermine it as easily as by disagreeing with the definition of a word in the title. Problematize. Now, this has many different forms, but problematizing is essentially acknowledging the problems that could arise in answering the question. So if you think of the question for this year, I'm not religious, but I am spiritual, what could the speaker mean by spiritual? Then the problems in that especially are, how can you understand what the speaker means when you don't know them? So how are you going to overcome problems such as this? That's an important thing to note in your essay at some point and to deal with in your essay at some point, preferably in the introduction if you can. And also just by doing this, you can show why you think the essay is so interesting as well, why it's such a valid point of discussion. The examiner will love to see that you're really engaged with the essay, you're aware of the problems and you're enjoying tackling the problems. They've asked you these questions because there are problems within them. They're not straightforward things to which you can answer yes or no and everybody would agree straight away. They're things where you'll have to come up with arguments and respond to the problems. So problematize, actually grasp what the essay is getting at. And outline. You can do this in the introduction, you don't have to, you can do this just on a piece of paper for yourself that you don't show the examiner, but you just keep while you're writing the essay. Though it is good to just do the outlining in the essay as well. But what do we mean by it? Just making sure that you have a strong structure to your essay. The examiner can follow it very easily and won't get lost as they go through your successive points or your argumentation. And this is so important both for you and for the examiner, but the examiner especially because, well, the depressing thing is you may spend days, weeks, months writing your essays, but the examiner is going to read it in maybe 10 minutes and not think about it again for the rest of their life. So make sure that as they're going through your essay, among 1,000 others, that your essay stands out as one that's extremely clear to read and extremely clear to follow. They will know exactly what you're arguing, and because they know exactly what you're arguing, they'll be able to come to a judgment on how brilliantly you argued it, how original your thoughts are. You don't want to come up with Einstein levels of genius argumentation, but to be let down by the fact that the examiner hasn't been able to see it because they've got lost in some very long sentences or because they're not quite sure why you're making this point. So when I say outline, it means clarity, both in argumentation and in the structure of the argumentation. I hope that all makes sense and that you're going to do each of these things before you get cracking in your essays and while you crack on with your essays.